Well, hello and welcome to this, the 14th, I believe, in our P2 webinar series. Today, we'll be looking at how one turns ideas into digital outcomes, making agile work for retailers. And for those who've joined these webinars before, you'll know that we tend to talk for about half an hour. We don't, unfortunately, have time for questions, but please do type them in because we do always answer them after the event. And of course, for those who've attended, we will be providing a copy of the slides, and we will be sharing those afterwards. And do feel free to share those with friends or colleagues as and when you feel appropriate. This is such an important webinar for us. It really is. It's hugely important. I think you'll enjoy it immensely. But before we charge straight into that, let me just take you through what we'll be covering. We're going to start off by having a bit of a look at channel shift and why it's so critical and why it's so important at the moment. We'll look at what we believe makes a successful digital delivery, and then we'll dive into something we call our pragmatic agile framework, which is really our way of making agile work particularly relevantly for retailers in this challenging environment. We'll finish off with a look at some of our real world success stories and some really good examples of what works and what doesn't work. And of course, we'll wrap up with some key reflections. It's a hugely important webinar. But before we dive into that, allow me to introduce P2 to those of you who have not come across us before. We are the world-beating digital transformation consultancy set up about 7 years ago to be a real challenger to the Big Four. We do that by delivering on our 3 P2 promises to improve, control, and deliver on our organization with their transformation ambitions. And we do that through the 12 services you see listed below there. Today we won't be diving into any of those particular services. We will talk about them more in the round and how they come together to support the retail sector. But luckily I won't be talking to you too much about that. I'll be joined by 2 genuine experts in the area, Adrian and Gary. Adrian, over to you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Adam. So let's crack on. Not so long ago, many retailers were trading their business through their physical store, and that had been the story for many moons before. And really, over the last sort of 20 years ago, there's been this rise of retailers trading their business online, and that's either kind of principally online or perhaps they had a store plus an online presence. But really, in the last 6 months or so, there is, and what's become known as the pivot to digital, there's been this real shift that's taken place. And if I just put that into sort of context, really, the growth in sales, the percentage of sales take within digital over the last 6 to 8 months has been the same kind of like equivalence to what's happened over the last 20 years. So that gives you some sort of real context in terms of the pressure that that retailers are under, really, to continue trading their business in these challenging times. And really that's created somewhat of a digital divide between the haves, or the omni-channel, and the digital pure plays, and how they're, I suppose, exploiting this opportunity that they're facing into at this point in time, and investing wisely in this, but also changing their business models. I mean, it wasn't so long ago that John Lewis came out and said they were changing their strategy to become a digital first business, which is a real big statement for them, really. And on the flip side of that, we have the have-nots. So it's almost the retailers who are sticking with the physical store for many reasons, but really have found it extremely tough in current climes, where they've had to shut stores, as well as look at occupancy in stores effectively. So really, whether you're a have, i.e. you're looking to optimize your digital delivery and capability that you have in-house in order to drive greater sales through that channel, or you're a have-not, whereby you're rethinking that strategy that you've had up to now. And actually, you're asking yourself some searching questions as to, do we need to move into this space? There's a lot there to go after, really. But for us, I suppose, and what we're seeing is there's sort of 5 key traits to delivering your digital ambitions successfully. And just looking, left to right here, and starting off on point 1, it's around backing the right ideas. So, within many retailers at the moment, they have lots of choices and finite resources. And this is around placing the right bets from those range of opportunities, prioritizing them effectively, and then making sure those benefits are really, really quantifiable, because we'll come back to that in a bit. And it's also about being able to respond quickly to demand. And now more than ever, this is really, really, hurting those retailers, whereby they find it difficult to deliver, change quickly within their digital estate. And practically what that means is that time is money. It costs them because they're running for their programs for longer, and actually there's lost sales associated with this. Now, whether that's kind of dropouts and people not sort of clicking through to purchase because it's just too challenging to do so, there's too many steps, all of those things kind of have an impact in terms of how you are performing in this current environment. And really, with that pressure that's taking place that we're seeing within retailers, it's around how do we deliver those digital outcomes safely? How do we protect delivery without breaking the business? Because particularly if you are one of those who have pivoted to digital, then now more than ever, you need to be, overly sensitive and careful around how you protect that delivery and continue trading your website successfully. And a really interesting, space that's opening up, really, which not a lot of people are doing huge amounts, in at this point in time, around how you optimize your delivery capability. So we have kind of, as I've just talked to, this situation where sometimes retailers, there's a growing pressure to do more. Then doing more is fine, but you have to have kind of on the supply side, you have to have the right engine in place in order to accept all of those demands coming in from the business. And really that's around how you're optimizing your capacity, your productivity, and the capability that you have in teams. And we'll touch on that a little bit later when Gary starts talking you through some of the work that him and I have been doing. And finally, really, it's around how we validate the beneficial effect. So once we've got the right idea, we're delivering it safely, or delivered it safely, and it's gone live, is it having the effect we expected? And really there's choices there, because either you've exceeded expectations and you want to do more of that, but it gives you that visibility, or alternatively it's not quite having the effect, and therefore we need to dial the dial up, really, just to make corrective changes and actually get us back on track. So really, those are sort of the, just at a very high level, 5 of the key areas that we're finding that are, for those retailers who can tick all those boxes, they can see that they're benefiting from that. And one of the questions that basically, that we get asked is, all of that makes sense, but principally, how do we land that, within our business, and how do we land it within our teams to make sure that we're more successful and they're more successful? And just here, I'll hand off to Gary for a bit, and he can talk you through practically some of the work that we've done with our clients to bring this to life for them. Gary?
Thank you very much, Adrian. So I'd like to start by sort of expanding upon Adrian's point about how do we back the right ideas. So if we can start on the left-hand side, we have defined something called the digital change triage. So this is your regularly occurring forum where new ideas are presented to the exec. With the client that I'm engaged with, this happens on a fortnightly basis. This is essentially your ideas factory, where people can bring in a 1-page lean canvas, which is your alternative to your traditional business case. And the benefit of this triage is that the exec can quickly approve or reject, swipe left or swipe right, which initiatives or which ideas shall proceed, and at this point they can assign ownership in terms of accountability and responsibility. So we've put in place a digital change triage. This is your first step in backing the right ideas. The next step is your idea sizing and prioritization. This focuses more on your traditional t-shirt sizing of initiatives. Now what we find here, that there's a really useful trick that we've deployed, which is making sure that the t-shirt sizing is performed by the core three. The core three is obviously your product owner, your delivery manager, and your solution architect. That way you get a rounded view on the size of any given initiative. Now with the client that I'm working with, we do this, you know, every single Monday. If there's nothing to size, everybody gets an hour back in their day, but it's kind of that cadence that we do like to get into. We then talk about prioritizing the initiatives, where we would focus on the business and the delivery people using criteria such as importance to the business or complexity. Again, the prioritization happens every Friday, so we do get into this regular rinse and repeats where we bring new ideas, we prioritize them, and we size them on a regular ongoing basis. What happens after that, once we have the t-shirt size and prioritization, is the digital PMO will perform your Tetris planning. This will then allow us to schedule the initiatives based upon the capacity. And this is a very important part, because if you don't base when you're going to land these initiatives based on the capacity of the teams, you're going to struggle. Now, this is just something that it's a phrase that we've defined as Tetris planning to help us make sure that we land initiatives in the right order based on the capacity that exists. Then we would move on to your digital roadmap. Higher priority initiatives will sit above the line, and that line is dictated by the capacity of the teams. Lower priority initiatives would sit below the line on what we call the reserve list, and they would stay there until additional capacity is provided or the priority changes. So it's almost like a promotion relegation. You can move initiatives above the line, or you can demote initiatives to be below that line. Now, we like to see the roadmap as a contract between the demand side of the business and the supply side of the business in terms of what gets done and when it gets done. So this is a really crucial part of the process that we find is actually, it's that handshake between the two sides of the organization that really cements what is going to get done, when it's going to get done on that roadmap. We then move on to delivering the roadmap itself. This is where your squads work through the roadmap using the Tetris planning that we've put in place by the digital PMO. The idea being that if we do this correctly, the capacity of the teams is never exceeded, and we get the value of building things in the right order based upon the priority dictated earlier in the process. We then go into the build and release using whatever Agile methodology we see fit. The client that I've been working with, as Adam mentioned at the beginning, we've gone with P2's Pragmatic Agile as the methodology. Now we can move on to making sure we do deliver the right ideas. So I mentioned earlier that the client that I'm working with, we're using Pragmatic Agile as that delivery vehicle. This allows us to focus on three key areas. The first one is filling the hopper. This will focus your BAs and your product owners to get ahead of the game in terms of elaborating and refining story points. And it will also make sure the focus from those roles is to build things in the right order, to build things in the right Moscow order. We then move on to emptying the hopper. This focuses the Scrum teams to drive productivity, and put simply, empty the hopper of the story points that the product owners and the BAs have supplied. So it's kind of that filling and emptying, you get into that motion. The third step is releasing the value. So this is getting into that regular release cadence, contracted show and tells, and the notion that the train leaves with or without you. So what we try to push for is we do not change the release date, but any functionality that cannot be provided in any given release goes back into the backlog and then into a future release. But it's very important to us that we do not constantly change the release date, because that adds in a layer of of administration and replanning that is often a drain on resources. Now we'll move on to how we track the right ideas. So I know it's a cliche, but it's very important that we can only manage what we can measure. Now, we advocate tools such as Jira as our one truth, if you like. There are multiple tools out there, multiple data sources, but we do advocate Jira as one of our preferred tools. Now, we start at the beginning with filling the hopper. This allows us to answer multiple questions. It allows us to answer the questions, are we on track? And are we building in the right order? So as an example, we could use the data that Jira supplies. We could have a look at Epic 11, for example, and we could say, right, we've elaborated Epic 11, but if you look at the priority, Epic 11 is not on that top list. So it allows us to ask the questions, are we building things in the right order? And that's a very important thing for getting the end-to-end journey right. The second step is emptying the hopper. So here, we're looking at the workflow. And by looking at that workflow that Jira can provide us, we can identify quickly if there's any blockers. So immediately, you will see that there is, ready for sit could potentially be a blocker because there seems to be a lot of stories stuck in that state. So at least it gives you the information to be able to ask the question, do we need to do anything about sit? Another thing that we can do, another piece of MI we can use with emptying the hopper is whether we're resolving the defects at a sufficiently fast rate in order to get us to the go live date that we require. So as an example, if we're closing down 3 or 4 defects a day, we've got a backlog of 20 defects, that's going to take us 5-6 days to go to resolve. Sorry, if we've got only 2 or 3 days before go live, we've got an issue, but we can call that out very, very early by using the defect list that we have and working out how quickly we need to get to the go live. So we've got that data to hand and we can use it very, very effectively. Then we can move on to releasing the value. This allows us to ask the question, are the business satisfied with the outcomes that are being delivered? So when we do a show and tell, we can actually track the percentage of user stories that have been signed off by the business and good to go. So as an example here, we can show that in the first sprint, 30% of those stories that we provided as part of the show and tell were rejected. That goes back in and will have to be built or refined a second time. This would also show a trend that over those 4 sprints, actually, do you know what? The volume of stories that have been rejected is decreasing, which is a good news story. But releasing the value, having that MI, looking at the amount of epics that are being produced, looking at the user stories that are being signed off, gives you that confidence that we are going in the right direction. And it's also a handshake back with the business to say, we built this, you asked for it, you've signed it off, we're good to go for the release. So Adrian, I know some of this, the MI is quite close to your heart. Is there anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think this is really, really powerful because I know you're sitting within the digital PMO, and typically when some clients think of PMO, they think every week they'll just do a status report that's got red, amber, green on it. And really, this starts to bring to life how sophisticated the assurance function needs to be. When you are driving digital delivery within your business, in order to make sure that you understand what's going on. And the data bit here is absolutely critical to that. And I suppose there's 2 dimensions. One of which you touched on is around the tooling. And certainly I know, we have built sort of automation tooling, which means from all of this data, it sort of analyzes it and condenses it into kind of really insightful conversations that enable us to take decisions quickly so that we can maintain speed and productivity of teams. That's one dimension to it. I think the other aspect to this is particularly where you may not have, let's say, in-house development teams, but you're outsourcing, that capability to third parties. Then again, this information is really key to be able to manage those third parties effectively, which both, in one sense, kind of, make sure that there's flow from idea through to delivery, but also kind of protects your investment, because all too often we've seen the answer is we need another sprint team, and actually what this can give you is to say, well, actually you've got a sprint team there who's only 40% at capacity, so we could make that team more productive. So it's giving clients that information whereby they can have sort of different conversations with some of those third parties at times. So this has been really, really powerful, and enables lots of really good conversations to take place on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis as to what we do next and how we manage that hopper and the flow through the digital production line, as it were. And really, I'm wondering, Gary, I think this might be a nice sort of juncture, really, just to skip on to bringing this to life in the context of one of the clients that we're working with at the moment, really. And the backdrop for for people on the call here was there's an annual investment into their digital CX portfolio of work, and teams are stood up. They're working collaboratively. Other consultants have come in to try and implement sort of agile ways of working, and really that hadn't worked too well, to be honest with you, because they took a bit of a cookie cutter approach. And really what this client wanted to do was streamline that production line, make it really clear how they were going to deliver their digital ambition and that they'd set themselves, and really needed a rethink and a reset and some help to do that. So really our mission, just looking at that, was around designing and embedding a new sort of end-to-end agile ways of working process. And we used our pragmatic agile methods and the toolkit that we have built over time that's tried and tested in order to do that. And part of that was also around defining real clear roles and responsibilities at each stage of that production line. Because one of the things we found, I don't think it's unique to any of the clients that we have, is sometimes there's a prevalence for people not to stay in their lane and to make decisions in relation to areas where it isn't necessarily their right to do so. So actually putting in those clear races really helped at each stage. And then also there was to create and track a clear set of performance metrics because they weren't in place at that time. And off the back of that enables us to then bolt on predictive analytics as to what's really happening at each stage, whether that's burn-up charts, whether it's defect run rates, etc., etc. All of that information enables us to take action in relation to it. And then there's around a point here around measuring and tracking the productivity across development teams. We had 3 of them, we've had up to 4 of them at some point, and actually knowing how busy they are and how effective they're being and how much work they're getting through really helps with reducing downtime, reducing waste, optimizing delivery, and protecting sort of client investment, because every pound counts, and that's certainly our mantra when we go in. Kind of, we're there to protect your investment. And then really it's around defining new digital KPIs, because at that point we would progress was being tracked, but there wasn't a link to that progress and the outcomes to real measurable business KPIs. What is it touching? Is it conversion? Is it abandonment? Is it NPS, etc.? Being really clear on that, and that's really helped quantify at the outset from those ideas which ones are having those effects. And rather than me talking to that, Gary, you're living and breathing this every day. Would you like to just touch on some of the benefits that you're seeing day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first one is that we have drastically increased the volume of initiatives that we've been able to deliver since we introduced the new ways of working. We're not saying it was easy, but I do think that the facts speak for themselves that with this particular client we have increased the volume of initiatives through the door and out live. We've also speeded up the decision-making process across the board, across the organisation. So specifically, we've introduced, as you mentioned, individual races through the triage, the sizing, the roadmap, and the delivery organisation, so everybody is crystal clear on what they're on point to deliver, what they're on point to do, and probably more importantly, the handoff to the next set of people in that production line. Thirdly, we've improved productivity through the squads, certainly 20, 30, maybe even 40% at times. And that's mainly down to just simplifying the process, reducing the handoffs, making people clear on who they need to give, the work activity to, and using that workflow to suppress blockers and to remove blockers which have become visible through some of the data we had on the previous slide. And then finally, you've mentioned KPIs. Everything that we've done has been measurable. We've even been able to introduce sort of early warning indicators, predominantly around capacity. So one thing that we can do through the Tetris planning that we've implemented is that we can say to the exec, okay, we've taken in this volume of initiatives, we've overlaid them on the capacity of the team. What we can see is you're going to have a bottleneck resource-wise in 5 months' time. But you know that now, so we can react to that now. We can either change where the initiatives land, we can put them in a different order, we can supplement the resource, but we can tell you that now that you're going to have a bottleneck in 5 months' time. So you're absolutely right, Adrian. These are the sorts of things that we've managed to successfully do with the client. Is there anything else you wanted me to add?
No, I think it's just kind of it's been really powerful. I know the feedback that we've had, from the clients and on the delivery side as well as the the business side, if I could put it that way, within the client, has been glowing in the sense of the difference that it's made day to day about them being able to respond to what's happening in the marketplace, driving sales, and also there being a clarity for teams as to who's doing what, because sometimes that can be really frustrating for people on the ground. So actually that's been a real sort of benefit for the teams effectively who are living and breathing this every single day, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Gary. So really, I'm mindful of time, just to wrap up a few key points really. So our advice here, our best advice is avoid the one-size-fits-all sort of textbook agile approaches. Invariably, they don't work within client environments. It's just too alien to the business. We'd suggest looking at 5 traits that we called out and seeing how many of them that you have in place or may wish to put in place, because they will make a difference. Trust us. Is to establish an effective digital production line. We can't stress this enough, from idea all the way through to outcomes on the other end that you're going to measure. It will really help just in terms of being understand what happens when and who's on point for what. And ensuring that you have the right stakeholders in each of those meetings is critical. And really just make sure that kind of your teams are set up for success. And it sounds an obvious thing to do, but kind of ensuring they're suitably sized, adequately experienced resources, and it's matched to what your digital ambitions are. The cost of not doing this is disproportionately higher than what the investment is up front. And I would just say trust us on that, because we've seen it time after time after time, and particularly where you're engaging third parties as well to support some of these activities. So really, I think that's kind of all I wanted to say on that front, really. There's just a few areas here how we can support you if you do kind of want to reach out. Now, whether that's undertaking a digital delivery maturity assessment to see how and where you could improve and speed up your digital delivery teams, or provide assurance functions or delivery teams in order to support the work that you have going on at this point in time, or are thinking of embarking upon. And with that, really, I'm going to hand over to Adam and just say thank you very much for your time today. Adam.
That's so kind, Adrian. Thank you very much. And thanks, Adrian and Gary. That was a really interesting, really practical walkthrough. A hugely important area, particularly for retail in this current environment. As mentioned, thank you to everyone who's asked questions. We will come back and respond to those questions. We also love to chat about this stuff. You've got our email addresses and our LinkedIn on the left there, so please do add us. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll be talking at that one about an introduction to Scaled Agile. We're taking people through a very brief whistle-stop tour of the safe Scaled Agile framework. And then shortly after that, we'll have a new thing for us here on the webinars. We'll be talking to an expert. We'll be talking to Peter Hazelwood of the Group Financial Crime area for Aviva, and that'll be our CEO, Phil, talking to Peter about some of the really interesting stuff that's going on in the fin crime world at the moment. So please do register for both of those. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you for joining us and wish you all a very happy weekend. Bye-bye.